We went because the drive back to the city felt longer than it was worth, and because the house had heat and beds and a long porch facing the lake. It was late October 2020, after the rentals ended and before the first snow. The road in was narrow, lined with bare maples and wet leaves pressed flat by tires. The lake had been drained for winter, something the owner mentioned in a message I read earlier, and I did not picture what that meant until I saw it. Where water should have been there was a wide basin of mud, dark and smooth in places, broken by ribs of old shoreline and tree stumps cut low decades ago. Some stumps stood like posts, others lay on their sides with roots exposed like bones. The slope down to the basin was steep and slick. A faint stream ran through the lowest part, not a lake anymore, just a thin vein moving toward a culvert at the far end. The air smelled sharp, like iron and rot. The house sat back from the edge, raised on short posts, with a deck that looked out over the empty bowl. Floodlights were mounted under the eaves, aimed toward the basin. They were on timers and sensors, the owner said, to deter trespassers when the place was empty. We carried our bags inside and shut the door. The house felt unused but clean. Dust lay on the window sills. A calendar still showed March. Outside, the sky went purple, then black. The basin disappeared into a flat void, and the stumps turned into shapes without edges. When the lights clicked on, they cut white cones across the mud, revealing tracks we hadn't noticed in daylight. They looked like long ovals and deep grooves, as if something heavy had slid and then stood again. I told myself they were from the draining, from equipment, from deer wandering when the water went down. We ate, then settled in for the night. I took the room facing the lake. The others slept down the hall. I left the blinds open because the lights made the outside easier to read than the dark inside. I lay awake longer than I expected, listening to the house cool and the occasional knock of branches. Around midnight, the lights went off. It happened cleanly, no flicker like a switch thrown. The basin vanished again. I waited for them to come back. They didn't. The dark pressed closer to the glass. I felt exposed, like the room had been put on display. I reached for my phone to check the time. As the screen lit, something moved far out where the stream cut through the mud. It wasn't fast. It rose, paused, then leaned. The movement had height to it, more vertical than a deer. The phone light ruined my night vision, so I set it down and watched with my eyes adjusting. A pale shape separated itself from the ground, tall against the darker mud. It wasn't glowing. It was just lighter, catching what little sky there was. I listened. There was a sound of splashing, soft but steady, as if someone were stepping through shallow water. There shouldn't have been water deep enough for that sound, not out there. The stream was thin. The basin looked dry from above. The splashing came again, closer this time, with a suction noise that made my stomach tighten. Mud can do that when it's saturated, I knew that, but the rhythm felt wrong, space like steps. The lights snapped back on. The pale shape froze, then lowered. When the light hit it fully, it didn't resolve into anything clear. It was too far and the angle was bad. The surface glare washed details away. I saw a long, narrow torso, lighter than the mud, and darker lines at the bottom that could have been legs or boots. Then the lights went off again, faster this time, like someone had tapped the switch twice. I sat up. My heart felt loud in my ears. I didn't wake the others. There was no good way to explain what I saw without sounding unsteady. I kept watching. The splashing resumed, now clearly audible through the glass and the deck boards. Each step made a wet slap and pull. The pale shape moved laterally, not toward the house but along the basin, angling toward the culvert. The lights came on again, stayed on longer, and I caught more of it. The torso was pale because it was covered. It looked smooth, like plastic or coated fabric. The head was dark, a hood or cap. The legs were wide and dark, sinking and lifting with effort. The lights cut out a third time. This time I heard a click from the side of the house, closer than the basin, like a breaker tripping or a switch thrown by hand. The splashing stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise had. I lay back, staring at the ceiling, counting breaths, waiting for something to happen that would justify waking the others. Nothing did. After a while, the lights came back on and stayed on. I slept in short pieces, waking whenever the house creaked. In the morning, the basin looked smaller. Fog hung low, filling the bowl like breath. The tracks were clearer now. They weren't animal prints. They were boot marks, wide and deep, with a repeating pattern. They led from the culvert up toward the left side, where the trees grew thicker, then back again. In places, the mud had been churned, as if someone had stood and worked there. Near the edge of the basin, close to where the slope began, I saw a rectangle of disturbed ground with straight edges, like something had been lifted and dragged. We packed up quietly. Nobody mentioned the night. I took pictures with my phone, careful to frame the marks and the disturbed patch. Near the side of the house, under the deck, I noticed the breaker box was open. The main switch was in the off position. There were fresh scuffs on the ground beneath it. A heavy extension cord lay coiled behind a stack of split wood, mud dried along its length. On the drive out, I saw a truck parked on the shoulder a mile down the road. It was an older pickup with a rack and a tarp tied down. Mud was caked on the tires up to the wells. In the bed, partially covered, were cut lengths of pipe and a portable pump, the kind used for draining low areas. A pair of chest waders hung over the side, pale and stiff with dried silt. Later, after we got home, I looked up the property records. The house shared a boundary with a strip of land owned by the county. That strip included the culvert and access to the basin when the lake was down. I found a local news item from the year before about thefts of old infrastructure, copper taken from drained lakes and abandoned lines during the off-season. The article mentioned someone had been using pumps to expose sections and working at night to avoid attention. It said security lights were often disabled at nearby properties. The pieces fit without forcing them. The height came from the waders and the posture of someone pulling against suction. The pale color came from coated fabric catching stray light. The splashing came from pockets of water trapped under a skin of mud, released with each step. The lights went off because someone reached the breaker under the deck, cutting power while they worked, then turning it back on when they moved away. The click I heard matched the sound of the switch. What stayed with me was not the explanation, but the way it felt to watch a person move through a place that looked empty, doing something methodical and illegal in the dark, close enough to hear, far enough to stay a shape. It was a reminder that absence can hide work, and that off-season does not mean unused. When I think of that night now, I don't picture anything unreal. I picture a man in waders, bent against the pull of mud, counting steps by feel, and I remember how small the house felt with the lights out. I was 19 and thought sleep was optional. It was summer 2010, the kind of humid New Jersey night where the air felt thick even underground. 6 of us crammed into a finished basement that smelled like carpet cleaner and warm electronics. Folding tables lined the walls. Towers hummed. Cables crossed the floor in loose coils. The ceiling was low enough that taller people ducked near the ductwork. We had blocked the tiny windows with blankets to kill the glare, which turned the room into a sealed box of light and noise. We started early and never slowed down. Hours passed without anyone checking the time. Energy drinks stacked by the trash can. The fridge upstairs emptied and stayed empty. The house sat on a quiet cul-de-sac. No traffic. No sirens. The only outside sound was the distant whine of highway tires when the wind shifted. Down there, the world narrowed to screens and fans and the click of keys. By 4 in the morning, the basement felt different. Not scary yet. Just off. The air seemed stale, like the system had stopped cycling. Sweat collected under my shirt even though the room was cool. My wrist stuck to the table edge. The fans in my case ran louder than before, then dipped, then surged again. A second later the internet dropped. Everything froze at once. 6 screens locked mid-motion, like insects pinned under glass. I leaned back to stretch and noticed the lights had dimmed. Not out. Dimmed, as if someone had turned a knob a few degrees lower. The fluorescent tubes flickered and steadied. The hum deepened. The silence that followed felt heavy because the room had been loud for so long. Without the game audio, small sounds stood out. The tick of cooling plastic. The hiss of dust in the vents. Someone's chair creaked when they shifted. That was when the scratching started. It came from behind the drywall on the far side, the wall that ran under the staircase. At first it sounded like someone dragging a wire. Short bursts, then a pause. I assumed mice. New Jersey basements had mice. Then the sound sped up. Nails on wood, fast and uneven, like something panicking. The drywall trembled. A faint puff of white dust fell from a seam near the baseboard and settled on the carpet. I watched the wall, waiting for it to stop. It did not. The scratching traveled sideways, then back again, tracing a tight space. It hit studs with dull thuds. The rhythm changed, like whatever it was had turned around and lost patience. My throat felt tight. The blankets over the windows made the room feel buried. The lights dipped again and steadied. The internet stayed dead. No one laughed. No one reached for a phone light. We all stared at the same section of wall because that was where the sound lived. The finished basement looked normal, which made it worse. Framed posters. A couch with a throw blanket folded just so. A small bar with fake stone facing. Clean lines meant to hide everything behind them. The scratching grew louder. It became frantic, a storm of motion in a place meant to be still. Drywall dust fell in a thin line, then stopped. Something hit the inside hard enough to make a hollow boom. I imagined ribs pressing, a skull scraping, for catching on screws. The picture arrived uninvited and stayed. The lights dimmed a third time and did not recover all the way. The basement glowed yellow and weak. The air felt warmer. The smell changed, sharp and sour, like wet insulation. The scratching paused. A slow drag replaced it, long and careful, as if the animal had learned the shape of the space and was testing it. I stood up without thinking, and the chair legs rasped on carpet. The sound behind the wall exploded in response. It slammed over and over in one spot. The drywall flexed. A hairline crack formed above the baseboard and crept upward. The finished surface could not hide the pressure. Whatever had been sealed away wanted out. I backed toward the stairs. My foot caught on a cable, and I steadied myself on the bar. The stone facing felt cool and solid, which grounded me for half a second. Then the power dipped again, and one of the fluorescent tubes went dark. The hum dropped to a buzz. In the half-light, the crack widened. Dust rained down. A wet sound joined the scratching, like breath pulled through fur. Someone upstairs moved. The house creaked. The scratching shifted direction, chasing the sound through the walls. It raced toward the corner under the stairs, then slammed there. The staircase vibrated. I pictured the narrow void behind it, framed tight and dark, filled with old insulation and wires. The previous owners had sealed something back there. I did not know that yet, but my body did. We went upstairs in a rush that felt clumsy and too loud. The basement door shut behind us and muffled the noise, but it did not stop it. The scratching carried through the structure, duller now, like it had sunk deeper. The living room lights were brighter, but they flickered too. The modem showed dead lights. Phones had bars but no data. Dawn pressed faint gray through the front windows. We waited in the kitchen, stiff and silent, listening. The scratching slowed. It became irregular. A long scrape, then nothing. A minute passed. Then another. The house settled. The HVAC kicked on, and the air changed again. When the sound returned, it was weaker. The frantic edge was gone. It sounded tired. Later, in full daylight, we went back down. The basement looked untouched at first glance. The blankets still hung. The posters were straight. The tables were where we left them. Up close, the wall told the truth. The crack had spread and branched. The baseboard bowed. Drywall dust coated the carpet in a pale drift. A damp stain darkened the seam near the floor. The homeowner called someone he knew. The panel came off in a careful rectangle. The smell rushed out, thick and rotting. Behind the wall was a crawl space that should not have existed. It ran along the foundation, narrow and low, blocked off with plywood screwed to studs. The plywood was splintered from the inside. Insulation hung in torn clumps. There were scratch marks everywhere, layered and old. Inside, wedged between pipes, was what remained of an animal too large to be a mouse and too small to be a dog. The fur was matted. The skull was cracked. One hind leg was trapped behind a brace, bone gnawed thin. It had been alive when the space was sealed. It had grown and moved and survived on insects and whatever it could reach through gaps. When the power dipped and the house went quiet, it had pushed with everything it had left. The homeowner admitted later, without details and without eye contact, that the previous owners had sealed that section after an animal problem. They had not removed what they trapped. They had covered it and finished the basement to hide the mistake. Over the years, more animals found the space through the same gaps. Some got out. Some did not. The wall held until it could not. The repairs took weeks. The basement was gutted. The sealed space was opened and cleaned. The wiring was rerouted. The internet came back. The lights stopped dimming. The house returned to its quiet routine. We never set up tables there again. I still think about how the scratching sounded when it first started, confused and fast, like hope. I think about the crack in the drywall, how small it was before it spread. I think about how easy it is to hide a problem behind clean lines, and how the house keeps track, even when people pretend not to. I'm Marcus, and this happened in 2018, the winter before everything in my life felt divided into before and after. I slept at my cousin's place because the buses stopped running after midnight, and the temperature dropped fast once the streets emptied. His building sat near a main road in Toronto, a long concrete slab from the 70s with narrow windows and dim yellow lights. The kind of place that smelled like dust and cleaning solution and old heat. The hallways were long and straight, with mirrors mounted at the far ends. Not decorative mirrors. Thick glass, bolted into metal frames, scuffed at the corners from carts and furniture. I noticed the mirrors right away because they made the space feel longer than it was. The ceiling lights repeated inside them, stretching the corridor until it looked endless. When we walked toward his unit, our reflections walked toward us from far away. I remember feeling watched, but not in a dramatic way. It felt like the mirrors were doing their job too well. I slept on the couch. The apartment was small and warm, the kind of warmth that makes the air heavy. The radiator hissed and clicked. Traffic noise drifted in even late, a constant low hum. I didn't drink much that night. I was tired and sober and alert in that dull way you get when you've been out too long and just want to lie down. Sometime after midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. The hallway outside the apartment was quiet, the lights still on, the floor clean in that uneven way where some tiles shine and others stay dull no matter how much you scrub them. The mirror at the end of the hallway faced the bathroom door. From where I stood, I could see myself reflected from far away, small and pale under the lights. As I washed my hands, I kept glancing at the mirror. Every time, I thought I saw a movement behind us in the reflection. Not a person, just a shift, like a shadow passing through. Each time I turned, the hallway behind me was empty. No sound, no footsteps. The building had that late-night stillness where every noise feels like it should echo but doesn't. I told myself it was fatigue. The mirror had marks and scratches. The lights flickered slightly, enough to create the illusion of motion. I went back inside and lay down again. Sleep came in pieces. Short, shallow stretches where my mind kept replaying the image of the hallway stretching on and on. I woke again around 3 in the morning. The apartment felt too quiet, like the radiator had stopped breathing. I needed water. I stepped back into the hallway. The lights were the same. The mirror was the same. I stood there longer this time, watching my reflection from a distance. I raised my hand. The reflection raised its hand after mine, but not at the same time. There was a delay. Not much. Less than a second. Enough that I noticed it without wanting to. I tested it again. I shifted my weight. I tilted my head. Each movement came back to me slightly late, like a bad video stream. My stomach tightened. I felt cold along my arms. Mirrors don't lag. They don't buffer. I moved closer, step by step, watching myself approach from the far end. The delay stayed constant. The closer I got, the more obvious it became. I reached out and touched the glass. It was cool, solid, and left a print that faded slowly. My reflection's hand met the glass just after mine. I stood there breathing, watching condensation bloom and vanish. I could hear my own breath, and nothing else. I stepped back. The reflection stepped back late. I turned around fast. The hallway behind me was empty, the same as before. I turned back to the mirror. The reflection turned back late. I didn't feel panic. Not yet. I felt a heavy, focused attention, like my body had narrowed down to the problem in front of me. I looked at the edges of the mirror. The frame was thicker than I remembered. The screws were uneven, some newer than others. The glass wasn't perfectly flat. There was a slight distortion near the bottom, like something pressed behind it. I leaned closer and cupped my hands around my eyes to block the light. The reflection did the same after a pause. Behind the glass, beyond the silvered surface, I thought I saw depth. Not darkness. Space. I stepped away and walked to the stairwell at the end of the hall. I opened the door and looked down. Concrete steps. Metal railing. A faint smell of damp. Nothing unusual. I came back. The mirror waited. I stood there until my legs started to ache. I needed to understand it, or at least see it break. I waved my arms faster, then slower. The delay never changed. I turned my back to the mirror and watched its edge from the corner of my eye. I saw movement there, just out of sync with me. I went back inside and didn't sleep. Morning came pale and gray through the windows. The radiator came back to life. The city woke up. I waited until my cousin left for work. I didn't want to explain anything. I went back into the hallway alone. The mirror was gone. Not cracked. Not covered. Gone. In its place was bare concrete, lighter than the surrounding wall, with faint rectangular marks where the frame had been. No screws. No dust outline. It looked like the mirror had never been there, like the wall had always been solid and blank. I stood there a long time. I ran my hand over the concrete. It was rough and cold and real. I checked the other end of the hallway. That mirror was still there, normal, reflecting me without delay. I didn't leave it there. I went to the building office later that day. I asked about the mirror. I kept my voice steady. I asked when it had been removed. I asked why. I learned enough to stop asking. The building had replaced mirrors on several floors over the years. Some had been removed entirely. The ones at the ends of certain hallways had been taken down after complaints. Not about reflections. About sounds. About drafts. About people feeling watched. Maintenance reports mentioned improper installation, gaps behind frames, access panels hidden behind fixtures. In one case, a mirror had been mounted over an old service opening that led into a narrow maintenance corridor between walls. A space that wasn't on the updated plans. The mirror on my cousin's floor had covered one of those openings. The delay wasn't the mirror. It was me watching a reflection through glass that wasn't meant to reflect. It was a piece of two-way glass mounted wrong, catching light from the hallway while someone or something behind it moved out of sync. A camera feed routed through old wiring. A security setup added years ago and forgotten. A maintenance worker checking something in the middle of the night. A lag in the feed. A fraction of a second that my brain caught and refused to ignore. The movement I saw wasn't a ghost. It was a person in a narrow space, watching a hallway through glass, delayed by bad equipment and old cables. The mirror wasn't haunted. It was misused. The building removed it after another complaint. They sealed the opening. They painted over the marks. I didn't sleep there again. I still think about that hallway when I pass old buildings. I look for mirrors at the ends of corridors. I watch how they reflect. I watch how they lag. My name is Aaron, and I was the one my parents trusted with the house that weekend. Summer 2016 felt endless in the suburbs outside Phoenix. The days burned white and the nights stayed warm, the kind of heat that never fully leaves the walls. My parents left Friday afternoon for a wedding in Flagstaff. They locked the bedroom door, left a note on the counter, and reminded me to keep everything secured. I took that part seriously. I always did. I checked locks out of habit, even when they were home. It made me feel calm to know every door had been handled. I had 3 friends over. We planned a simple sleepover. Pizza grease on paper plates. Controllers passed around. The low hum of the AC fighting the heat. Nothing about the night felt off. The neighborhood was quiet and familiar, rows of tan houses, gravel yards, and short block walls. The kind of place where everyone knew which cars belonged and which didn't. The back of our house faced a drainage canal with a dirt path. It stayed dry most of the year. People walked dogs there. Sometimes kids rode bikes. I never liked it after dark, but it was normal. By midnight, we were tired in that restless way that comes from staring at screens too long. We spread sleeping bags across the living room floor. The TV stayed on with the volume low. I did my last round before lying down. Front door locked. Garage door sealed. Sliding glass door checked twice. The back door opened into the laundry room. I locked it and pressed the handle to be sure. The deadbolt was firm. I remember the click. I remember the weight of it. That detail matters. Our house had a basic security system. Door sensors. A backyard camera mounted under the eave, angled toward the door and the gravel. It sent motion alerts to my phone. It almost never went off unless a cat passed through or the wind moved a plant. I left my phone face down near my head and closed my eyes. Sleep came in pieces. The AC cycled on and off. The house made its usual sounds. Pipes shifted. The fridge clicked. Nothing unusual registered. At 3:12 a.m., my phone vibrated against the floor. The light flashed up toward the ceiling. The screen showed a notification from the camera. Backyard motion detected. That alone was not alarming. It happened sometimes. What pulled me fully awake was the time. Everything feels wrong at that hour. I picked up the phone and opened the feed. The image loaded slowly, then cleared. The back door was open. Not wide. Just enough to show a dark slice between the door and the frame. The laundry room light was off. The camera angle caught the edge of the door, the threshold, and the gravel beyond. The night air looked thick, like it always does in summer. What I noticed next made my stomach tighten. The lens had a soft blur across part of it, a fogged crescent that faded in and out. It moved with a rhythm. In and out. Slow and heavy. The motion indicator kept triggering. No figure stepped fully into view. No shadow crossed the ground. The blur appeared, receded, then appeared again, right at the edge of the frame. Close enough that the camera picked up moisture. Someone was standing there. I did not wake the others right away. My body felt stuck, like if I moved too fast something would break. I stared at the feed and tried to make sense of it. I thought about heat. I thought about a sensor glitch. I thought about an animal. But animals don't fog lenses that way. The blur matched breath. The shape shifted like a face leaning in and out of range. I kept watching. The door did not move. The opening stayed the same. That detail bothered me more than anything. If someone had just opened it, the angle would be different. If the wind had pushed it, it would sway. It was fixed, like it had been placed there and left. I forced myself to get up. I moved slow to avoid noise. My feet found the tile. The air felt colder inside than it should have. I crossed the living room and stopped short of the laundry room. From where I stood, I could see the door was open exactly as on the feed. A few inches. No light spilling in. No sound from outside. The house felt too still. I did not step closer. I stayed where I was and checked the lock from a distance. The deadbolt was turned. It sat in the unlocked position. I knew that wasn't possible without intent. I knew I had locked it. That certainty sat heavy in my chest. The fog on the lens thickened, then cleared. The motion alert triggered again. I did not see a face, but I saw the outline of a shoulder press briefly into the edge of the frame. Whoever it was stood inches from the camera, angled just out of sight. That placement felt deliberate. I backed away and returned to the living room. My friends slept through it, unaware. I did not shake them awake. I did not call out. I didn't know why. Fear made everything narrow. I locked myself into the bathroom instead, turned off the light, and watched the feed from the floor. For nearly 20 minutes, the camera recorded small movements. Breathing. A shift of weight. Gravel crunching once softly, then stopping. The door never opened further. It never closed. The person never stepped inside. At 3:34 a.m., the fog vanished. The motion alert stopped. The feed showed an empty yard. The door remained open. I waited longer than made sense before moving. When I finally crossed the house again, my hands shook so badly I had to steady them against the wall. I closed the door and locked it. I pressed my shoulder into it, then checked the bolt twice. I pulled the curtain over the window. I sat against the door until sunrise. Morning brought noise back to the neighborhood. Cars started. Sprinklers clicked on. The world felt ordinary again, which made the night harder to accept. When my parents returned later that day, I told them everything. They checked the system logs. The camera had recorded motion exactly as my phone showed. The door sensor logged an unlock at 2:47 a.m., then an open at 2:49. No alarm sounded because the system was in home mode and the backdoor delay had not been armed correctly. That was my fault. I had missed that setting. A police report was filed. An officer walked the canal and the yard. He pointed out shallow footprints near the gravel edge. They were partial, pressed deep by weight, too large to belong to any of us. The prints stopped near the camera, then turned back toward the canal. No signs of forced entry. No missing items. 2 days later, a neighbor 3 houses down mentioned someone knocking on her back door around 3 a.m. the same night. She did not answer. Another neighbor found his side gate unlatched that morning. Weeks later, a man was arrested after being caught on a different camera along the canal. He had been cutting through yards at night, testing doors, watching houses. He admitted to opening doors quietly and standing still to listen before entering. He said the heat made it hard to breathe, so he stayed close to the door for air. The explanation lined up with every detail. The timing, the fog, the door position, the fact that nothing else happened. Knowing who he was and why he did it did not bring relief. It only made the memory sharper. He had been close enough to breathe on the camera, close enough to step inside if he chose to, close enough that the only thing between us was a few inches of space and a delay setting I forgot to turn on. I still lock doors out of habit. I still check them twice. When I think back to that night, I do not picture a face. I picture the open door, held perfectly still, and the slow cloud of breath drifting across the lens, proving someone was there, waiting, deciding. Ryan lived at the edge of a bluff where the land ended without warning. His backyard fence leaned toward the drop, its posts sunk into sandy soil that never felt solid. From the living room windows you could see the ocean far below, dark and restless, hitting the rocks in long, slow bursts. When the wind came in from the water, the whole house moved. The walls flexed. The floor gave a soft creak, like the place was breathing. I had been there before during the day, but that night felt different from the start. It was his birthday, and his parents let him invite a group of us to stay over. We were around 11 or 12, old enough to think we were tough, young enough to be loud about it. The house was full of running feet and sugar and sweat. The air smelled like pizza grease and salt. Outside, the sky went flat and gray as the sun dropped. The ocean wind picked up, sliding through the gaps around the windows. We didn't notice the change at first. We were focused on games, on staying awake, on the idea that this night mattered. The power went out without warning. No flicker. No warning hum. 1 second the lights were on, and the next they were gone. The television cut to black. The refrigerator stopped. The house fell into a quiet that felt wrong for a place sitting above the ocean. The only light came from the windows, a dim wash of moonlight and reflected water. The wind pressed harder against the walls, and the house answered with a low shift, wood against nail. We stayed loud for a few minutes, more out of habit than courage. The adults were asleep in another part of the house, and none of us wanted to be the one to check on them. The dark stretched. Shapes turned unfamiliar. The ocean below us kept moving, but without the usual sounds inside the house, it felt closer. Every wave seemed to travel up the cliff face and into the floor. That was when the sound started. It didn't match the waves. It wasn't the crash or the pullback or the slap against rock. It came from lower, from somewhere under the bluff, and it rose upward in a long curve. It had weight. It wasn't sharp. It carried, bending as it climbed, then dropping off and returning again. The sound reminded me of something alive, trying to find its own echo. It repeated, not on a rhythm I could follow, but close enough to feel intentional. The house reacted to it. The floor vibrated in a way that didn't line up with the wind. A few loose items on a shelf rattled. The windows trembled, not from pressure, but from something moving air. The sound came again, stronger, then faded, then came back, like it was pacing along the base of the cliff. We froze. Not all at once, but in stages, each of us realizing the same thing without looking at each other. The noise was too focused to be weather. It wasn't machinery. It wasn't a boat. It carried up the rock face, bounced, and returned altered, as if the cliff itself was answering. I moved closer to the window. The glass felt cold. I could see the pale line of surf far below, stretched thin by the low tide. The rocks were exposed in dark clusters. The water pulled back farther than I expected, leaving wide, wet stretches that reflected the sky. The sound came again, closer this time, and I felt it in my chest before I heard it fully. It was deep, strained, and uneven. The wind shifted. For a moment the sound broke apart, then it came back stronger, longer, filling the space under the house. The floor vibrated again, slow and heavy, like something massive had shifted its weight. I imagined the cliff face, the narrow strip of beach below it, the way the water cut channels through the sand when it retreated. I imagined something down there that didn't belong, something too large for the space it had found itself in. The power stayed out. Time stretched. The sound repeated, then changed, then faded into something closer to breathing. At some point I realized it wasn't calling outward. It was responding. The echoes came back altered, and the original sound adjusted, like it was listening to itself through the rock. That thought settled into me and stayed there. Eventually exhaustion won. The dark didn't lift, but it thinned. The sound slowed and then stopped. The wind eased. The house relaxed. Sleep came in shallow pieces, broken by the memory of vibration and the sense of weight below us. Morning arrived gray and quiet. The power was still out. The ocean looked farther away in daylight, less personal. When we went outside, the wind was mild, and the air smelled sharp and clean. The bluff edge was damp, the grass flattened in places where we had leaned too close the night before. We followed the path down toward the beach, a narrow trail that zigzagged along the cliff face. The tide was out farther than I had ever seen it. The beach was wide and exposed, littered with kelp and smooth stones. The sand near the waterline was torn up, marked by deep grooves that ran at an angle toward the ocean. They were not straight. They curved and overlapped, wide at one end and narrowing as they reached the water. The marks were massive. Each groove was as wide as my arm span. The sand between them was churned and compacted, pressed down by something heavy dragging itself forward. There were impressions where the sand had collapsed inward, places where weight had shifted suddenly. Near the rocks at the base of the cliff, the sand was darker, wet, and packed hard. There were smears there, thick and uneven, leading back toward the water. Farther out, the grooves disappeared under the surf. There were other signs once we knew how to look. Broken shells crushed into the sand. Kelp torn free and twisted into knots. A strong, sour smell hung in the air. Not the usual clean salt, but something animal, something stressed. The rocks closest to the water were slick, as if something had rubbed against them repeatedly. Later, after the power came back and the adults made phone calls, the explanation came together in pieces. A large elephant seal had hauled out during the night, driven off course by storms farther north. It had come up onto the narrow strip of beach beneath the cliff, exhausted and disoriented. With the tide high and the wind pushing sound upward, its calls had bounced off the rock face and returned distorted, amplified by the shape of the cove. The vibrations had traveled through the cliff and into the house above. Trapped by the rising water and the steep rock behind it, the animal had panicked. It had dragged itself along the sand, searching for space for a way back. When the tide turned and the water pulled away, it followed the slope it could feel, carving those grooves as it went. By morning, it was gone, back in the water, leaving only the marks and the smell and the memory of something too large moving where it didn't belong. Years later, I still think about that night when the power goes out and the world narrows to sound and weight and dark. I think about how close we were to the edge without knowing it, how the ocean carries things in and out without asking permission. I think about the way the house shook, not from fear, but from proximity, from sharing space with something real and struggling. The explanation doesn't make it smaller. It makes it heavier. I volunteered to sleep in the basement because I liked the cold and the quiet. The house was crowded that weekend, people sleeping on couches and floors. Heat turned too high to keep everyone comfortable. I had always slept better in low temperatures. The basement felt honest. Concrete walls, bare studs in places, a low ceiling that held the chill. There was one small window at ground level, narrow and rectangular, set into the concrete. It sat just above the mattress I laid out, close enough that I could feel cold air drift down from it. The basement smelled like dust and old cardboard. The floor was bare except for a thin rug under the mattress. The light switch was at the top of the stairs, so once I went down, I stayed down. I liked that. No footsteps above once everyone settled. Just the hum of the furnace cycling on and off, water ticking in the pipes, the house breathing. I lay on my back for a long time, eyes open, letting my body cool. The window showed a slice of darkness and the faint outline of grass. No moon, no streetlight, just black. I remember noticing how quiet it was outside compared to inside the house. Even the furnace sounded far away. Sometime after midnight, I rolled onto my side. The air felt heavier near the window, cooler than before. I assumed a cloud had moved or the temperature had dropped. I pulled the blanket higher and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, the window was no longer dark. It was filled, not with a face, not with eyes, just something solid pressed close enough to block all light. The glass looked black, but not empty. There was texture to it, uneven, like fabric stretched over something rounded. I couldn't tell where it began or ended. The edges of the window frame were still visible, which made it worse. Whatever was there was flush against the glass, centered, steady. My first thought was that I had misjudged the time. Maybe dawn was coming, and the light looked strange. That idea didn't hold. The darkness was too dense. It absorbed instead of reflecting. I sat up slowly, careful not to shift the mattress too much. The window stayed the same. I waited for movement. Nothing changed. The furnace clicked on. The sound made my chest tighten because it proved time was passing. The house was normal. The basement was normal. The window was not. I leaned closer, stopping just short of the glass. The surface showed faint condensation on the inside, a thin fog forming where the cold met the warmer air. The shape beyond it did not move or breathe. It did not fog the glass from the outside. It just stayed there, pressed close, as if resting. I told myself it could be an animal. A deer. A dog. Something curious that wandered into the yard. That explanation fit the location, even though I had never seen animals that close to the house before. The problem was the size. The window was small, but the mass behind it was larger than the frame, spreading beyond the edges. Whatever it was had weight. It leaned. I lay back down, turning so the window was behind me. I counted furnace cycles. I listened to the pipes. I tracked my breathing. Sleep didn't come. Every few minutes, I rolled just enough to glance back. The window stayed blocked. At some point, I noticed the temperature near the mattress rise slightly. The cold air from the window was gone. The glass no longer radiated chill. It felt insulated, sealed. That meant the object was still there, still pressed close enough to change the airflow. I checked my phone once. A little after 1 a.m. I didn't check again. I didn't want to know how long it would last. Hours passed in pieces. My body ached from holding tension. My thoughts looped through practical explanations and rejected them one by one. No footsteps outside. No scraping. No sound at all. Just the steady presence against the glass. Near morning, the darkness behind the window lightened slightly, not because it moved, but because the sky did. Gray seeped around the edges where the mass didn't quite cover the frame. That was how I knew it hadn't been a dream. The shape didn't fade. The world around it changed. When it finally moved, it wasn't sudden. The pressure eased. The light returned in a slow gradient. The object pulled away, upward and back, leaving the glass clear. For a few seconds, I saw nothing but damp grass and the dull sky. Then even that looked normal. I didn't move until full daylight reached the window. The house woke above me. Pipes ran. Doors opened. The furnace shut off for good. I went upstairs and waited until everyone was up before going outside. I didn't mention the night. I didn't want explanations shaped by other people's voices. The yard was wet with morning dew. Near the basement window, the grass was flattened in a wide oval, pressed down so evenly it looked ironed. The blades were bent but not broken, smoothed in one direction, as if something heavy had rested there for a long time without shifting. The shape extended beyond the window on all sides, wider than my arms spread. No tracks led to it. No clear marks led away. Just the oval and then normal grass. The ground was firm. No mud. No sign of hooves or paws. I pressed my hand into the flattened area. It was warmer than the surrounding lawn, faintly, like body heat trapped under a blanket. I stood there longer than I should have. In daylight, it looked less threatening, more confusing. I walked the perimeter of the yard. No fences were broken. No trash disturbed. Nothing else out of place. Later that day, while helping clean up, I noticed the basement window from inside. There was a smear on the glass I hadn't seen before, faint and uneven, like oil from skin or fabric rubbed against it. Not a print. No pattern. Just residue, higher than my head when I stood straight. That night, after everyone left, I stayed awake and searched records online. The house backed onto an undeveloped stretch of land that led to a drainage corridor and then to a freight line used intermittently. People passed through that area sometimes. Not often, but enough that local posts mentioned tents found and cleared. One entry described a man found sleeping against houses for warmth during colder months, choosing spots shielded from wind. I went back outside with a measuring tape. The height of the window matched the height of a person sitting with their back to the wall, knees drawn up, shoulders hunched. The width of the flattened grass matched a body curled on its side. The lack of tracks made sense then. Dew forms after pressure. The warmth explained the heat. The residue on the glass explained the insulation. Someone had rested there for hours, unmoving, using the house as shelter. The part that stayed with me was not fear after that. It was proximity. Someone had chosen that exact spot, pressed close enough to block the world from my view, close enough that we shared a boundary of glass and air all night. I slept with my back to a person I didn't know, separated by inches, each of us unaware of the other's thoughts, both seeking quiet and cold in different ways. I never slept in that basement again, not because of what it might have been, but because of what it was. I went because my friend was not sleeping. The kid next door had gone missing 2 days earlier, and the house felt wrong to him after dark. Everyone said the boy wandered into the woods. That happened sometimes there. The tree line sat close to the back fences, and the land folded into itself fast. Trails vanished. People got turned around. Search trucks had already come through, slow and loud, tires packed with clay. After sunset, the road went quiet again. The house was a narrow split level with beige siding and a small deck out back. It smelled like laundry soap and old carpet. The windows were thin. You could hear the creak at night if the wind stayed down. I took the couch. He took his room. We left the lights low and the television off. The air felt pressed down like before a storm. I had seen the missing kid a few times that summer. He rode a bike too big for him and leaned into turns like he was older. He played alone. His yard stayed messy. No toys put away. The parents worked late. That was the story everyone used. The woods behind the houses looked black even before dark. The branches grew close and low, with vines that hooked at your ankles. Old wire fencing cut through it in places, left from farms that were gone. People dumped things there. Mattresses. Tires. A broken boat once. The searchers had marked trees with tape, bright against the leaves. Night came slow. I lay on my back and watched the ceiling fan spin. The air had that damp smell from the woods, green and heavy. Somewhere an animal moved, small and fast. I did not check the time. I tried to sleep. The tapping started after midnight. It came in short bursts, spaced out, careful. Not scratching. Not wind. The sound of a knuckle on glass. 3 taps. A pause. 2 taps. Another pause. It came from the back of the house, low, near the deck. I stayed still. I counted breaths. The tapping stopped, then returned closer together, like someone testing patience. I kept my eyes closed. The house held its breath with me. At some point I slept. Morning light found the room gray and flat. The fan hummed. My mouth tasted sour. I sat up and felt that thin fear you get when nothing bad has happened yet, but you know it could. The back window showed the deck wet with dew. The glass was clean except for smears where something had pressed and dragged. Below it, on the deck boards, were muddy footprints. They came from the edge of the woods, crossed the yard, climbed the steps, and stopped at the window. The toes pointed inward, toward the glass. They were small but heavy, the kind of print made by boots filled with water. The mud was the red clay from deeper in the woods, not the loose dirt from the yard. The prints ended there. No turn. No retreat. Just a halt. We did not call anyone right away. The sun was up. The fear had changed shape. We followed the prints back, as far as we could without stepping on them. They came straight out of the trees, no wandering, no slips. At the tree line the ground had been disturbed, leaves pressed down in a narrow path, like something had been dragged or guided. Past that, the forest swallowed it. By noon the search trucks were back. Tape went up again. People moved with purpose. The window got photographed. The deck got measured. I stood off to the side and watched the woods. I kept thinking about the taps, how even they were, how patient. The day dragged. By evening the house filled with a tired quiet. The searchers left. The woods went dark again. I stayed another night. The tapping came back, earlier this time. Same pattern. Same place. I did not move. I focused on the sound and noticed something new. Between taps there was a faint scrape, like rubber on wood. The deck railing shifted once, a soft creak. The tapping stopped. Then it started again, higher, like someone had adjusted their stance. Morning brought more prints, fresher, overlapping the old ones. There were other marks too. A thin line in the dirt where something long had been pulled. On the side of the house, near the corner, the siding had a smear at knee height, the same clay. The explanation came slowly, pieced together over days, not all at once. The missing kid had been found alive that afternoon, 3 miles into the woods, dehydrated and filthy, hiding in a hollow under a fallen tree. That part spread fast. Relief traveled house to house. People smiled again. The rest did not spread. The boy had not wandered. He had been taken. The man who took him lived 2 houses down, close enough to watch the back decks from his kitchen. He worked odd hours. He kept to himself. He knew the trails. He knew which yards stayed dark at night. He had used the woods because they made a good story. He had brought the kid back to the edge of the neighborhood at night to test houses, to see who would open a door. He had told the boy to tap. He had stood off to the side, out of sight, watching windows. When no one answered, he had pulled the kid back into the trees by the arm, boots sinking into clay, toes pointing forward until they did not. The marks on the deck matched the man's work boots. The smear on the siding matched his knee. The path in the leaves matched his stride. He had returned because he thought fear would thin the night. He had not expected anyone to stay. They found his truck abandoned near an old logging road. Inside were supplies, rope, a tarp, food. He was caught 2 days later trying to cross into another county, mud still in the treads, scratches on his arms. I did not stay another night. The house felt smaller after that, like it had been measured and found wanting. The woods stayed where they were. The deck got scrubbed. The window got replaced. The boy went home. Years later, when I think of it, I think of the patience in those taps, the way they waited, the way they assumed someone would answer. I think of the prince stopping at the glass, toes turned in, and how close the house came to opening. I stayed over because my friend's parents were out of town, and the house sat too far from mine to drive back late. It was an old farmhouse in rural Ohio, the kind with additions layered onto it over decades. During the day it felt ordinary, even small. At night it spread out. Hallways seemed longer. Doorways looked taller. The ceilings held darkness instead of light. The place smelled like dust and dry wood with a sour edge from the basement that never fully aired out. The heat had already been turned on for autumn. It was the old kind, forced air patched and repatched. When it kicked on, it didn't roar. It knocked and clicked. Pipes snapped. Ducts shifted. The sound carried through the walls as if someone moved slowly inside them, tapping with care. None of it sounded broken. It sounded tired. I slept on the couch in the living room. His bedroom smelled like damp clothes and old carpet. The couch smelled like sun and fabric cleaner, which felt safer. The living room sat above the unfinished basement. Bare bulbs down there cast a dull glow through the gaps in the floorboards near the vents. You could feel cold rising from below if you stood still long enough. I fell asleep on my side, facing the back wall. I remember checking the time on my phone before I drifted off. Just past midnight. I remember thinking the house felt too quiet, like it was holding something back. I woke up already alert. No dream fading, no slow return. My eyes opened and I stayed still. The room was dark but not black. A thin stripe of light leaked through the kitchen doorway from a night bulb left on near the sink. I could hear the heat running. Not loud, just present. Then I noticed the sound that pulled me fully awake. It was slow. A long pull, then a pause, then a release. The pattern repeated. It came from below me. Not from the vents. From the floor itself. It sounded like air moving through a wide space, not rushing, not whistling. More like a chest filling and emptying. I held my breath without meaning to. The sound kept going. When I exhaled, it didn't change. That made it worse. If it were wind, it would shift. If it were the furnace, it would cycle. This stayed steady. The floor under the couch moved. Not enough to see. Enough to feel. A soft lift under my ribs, then a drop. The couch springs answered with a dull creak each time. I pressed my palm flat against the cushion and focused. The motion was real. It wasn't the whole floor. It was the section above the basement center, where the support beams ran longest between posts. I counted without numbers. Pull. Hold. Release. Pull. The timing felt wrong for any machine I knew. Too slow. Too even. I lay there for a long time. My body wanted to turn, to sit up, to leave the couch. I didn't. I listened and tried to match what I heard to something normal. The house settled when the heat ran. Wood expanded. Cold air got pushed out. I knew all that. I had grown up around old houses. None of them ever felt like this. The smell changed. A damp note crept in, like soil after rain. It didn't flood the room. It lingered near the floor. The breathing sound deepened. The floor dipped a little farther on the release. The couch legs scraped the wood by a hair. I checked the time again. 2:40 a.m. The light from the phone made the room feel smaller, more contained. When I turned it off, the sound felt closer. I focused on the details. The vents stayed quiet. The walls didn't tick. The only noise was the air moving below me. The rhythm never sped up. It never slowed down. It did not stop. At some point I realized the sound had a direction. The pull came from the basement stairwell area, even though the stairs were on the other side of the house. The release seemed to move outward, spreading under the living room and into the kitchen. I pictured the basement as I had seen it earlier that evening. Dirt floor in parts. concrete in others. Old shelving. A low ceiling supported by thick beams. A crawlspace opening cut into the far wall, framed in rough boards. It was small. Too small for anyone to move through easily. I remembered it because it looked out of place, like a mouth someone had tried to hide. The breathing continued until the heat shut off. The knock and click returned. Pipes cooled. The house made its usual noises. The air sound faded with them. The floor stopped moving. I did not sleep after that. I lay still until the light outside changed from black to gray. Birds started up near the fields. The house felt smaller again, like it had pulled itself back in. In the morning I stood up slowly, testing the floor. It felt solid. Ordinary. The couch sat where it always had. No marks, no cracks. I walked to the kitchen and made coffee. The smell covered whatever else lingered low to the ground. I went down to the basement alone. The light switch buzzed before the bulb came on. The air down there was cold and wet. I followed the beams to the far wall. The crawlspace door hung open. It wasn't broken. The wood wasn't split. The nails were still in the frame, bent outward, as if they had been pulled straight through and then stopped. The door rested against the wall at an angle. The soil inside looked disturbed. Not dug out. Pressed down. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. Later that morning I checked the outside of the house. The ground along the foundation showed fresh settling near the crawlspace wall. The vent covers were loose. One had been pushed inward. The metal was bowed. I spent the rest of the day thinking through what I had heard. Old farmhouses like that weren't sealed. They breathed whether anyone noticed or not. When the heat kicked on at night, warm air rose fast through the upper floors. Cold air got pulled in from anywhere it could. The basement became a low-pressure pocket. If the crawlspace vent had clogged or collapsed, the air would rush through the remaining opening. Slow, heavy, rhythmic if the furnace fan stayed steady. The floor movement made sense once I saw the beams. Long spans with few supports. A pressure change underneath could lift them by a fraction, then let them fall back. Enough to feel, not enough to see. The crawlspace door had been nailed shut years ago because animals kept getting in. Over time, moisture had rotted the wood around the nails. The pressure changes at night did the rest. Each cycle pulled a little more until the nails bent and slid free. The door didn't burst open. It eased open, one breath at a time. That explanation fit everything. The timing, the smell, the movement, the sound. It didn't make it easier to remember lying on that couch while the house worked itself open beneath me, slow and steady, like it needed air and knew where to find it. March 2014 sits in my memory as a block of cold that never thaws. Northern Michigan still looked like winter then. Snowbanks rose higher than the hoods of our cars. Pines sagged under ice. The retreat center sat deep in state land, a cluster of low buildings linked by plowed lanes that refroze each night. We were supposed to leave before dark. The final session dragged on. By the time we stepped outside, sleet had started to fall, thin and sharp. The roads turned to glass in minutes. Staff shut the gates and told us we were staying. No one argued. 8 of us were sent to a bunk cabin meant for 6. It was the kind built fast and cheap, with raw pine walls, a single propane heater, and narrow bunks bolted to the floor. The windows were small and set high. Outside, the woods pressed close. Snow filled every gap between trunks. The silence felt packed in, as if sound had been wrapped and stored away. I took a top bunk near the back wall. The mattress smelled like dust and old detergent. Boots lined the door. Wet coats hung from nails and dripped onto the floor. The heater clicked and hummed. Someone coughed. No one laughed. Fatigue settled over us without comfort. Lights went out early. Darkness arrived whole. The cabin creaked as the temperature dropped. Ice cracked somewhere far off. The woods stayed quiet in a way that felt arranged, not natural. Even wind seemed absent. Snow usually carries sound. That night it swallowed it. Sleep came in pieces. I woke often without knowing why. Each time, the silence pressed harder. Sometime after 1, a low sound reached the cabin. It did not have rhythm. It moved. It passed along one wall, then faded, then returned on another side. It was not steps. It dragged. The sound carried weight. It pressed against the snow rather than breaking it. Slow pulls followed by brief pauses. The pattern stayed steady, patient, like someone moving something they did not want to drop. It circled the cabin wide at first, then closer. Each pass scraped longer, louder. The wood walls seemed thinner with every lap. I lay still. Breath stayed shallow. The heater clicked off. Cold crept in from the floor. The dragging came close enough to feel through the bunk frame, a vibration more than noise. It passed under my window. The height was wrong for a deer. Deer hooves tap and scatter. This stayed low and long, like a chest or shoulder sliding through crusted snow. The sound continued between 1 and 4. Time lost shape. Each circuit felt slower than the last. Snow shifted against the foundation. Ice popped from the eaves. No other sounds followed. No sniffing. No snorting. No impact against the door. Just the same heavy pull, measured and deliberate, always moving, never stopping. At some point the heater came back on. Warm air stirred dust. The dragging receded, then returned once more along the back wall. After that, nothing. Silence returned to its packed state. Sleep did not. Morning light filtered gray through the high windows. No one spoke as we dressed. The air inside smelled stale and sharp. The door stuck from ice. When it opened, cold poured in. Outside, the snow lay smooth except for a wide track carved into it. The marks started near the tree line and looped around the cabin in a rough oval. The snow had been pressed flat, then torn in places where crust gave way. The width stayed consistent, wider than a boot, narrower than a sled trail. No clear footprints ran alongside it. The height of the disturbed snow rose to knee level in spots, pushed up by something broad and heavy. It looked dragged, not walked. We followed it around. The track came close to the walls, close enough that the snow piled against the siding. At the back of the cabin, it pressed right up to the wood. The marks ended there. No turn away. No return path. Just a clean stop at the wall. Beyond that point, the snow stood untouched. No exit. No continuation. The woods beyond remained smooth, branches iced and still. It looked wrong in a way that set the stomach tight. Staff arrived late morning with a plow and a tracked utility vehicle. They studied the marks without urgency. The retreat manager knelt and brushed snow with a glove. He did not look alarmed. He looked tired. Later, after the roads softened enough for travel, explanation came in pieces, built from small details that fit too well to ignore. The utility vehicle used overnight maintenance sleds made from old plastic water tanks, cut and flattened. When loaded with soaked mats and ice-scraped debris, they dragged heavy and wide. The driver had circled buildings during the storm to check propane vents and clear drifts. Ice had built on the machine's treads. At times, it slid more than it rolled, pulling the load behind it. Wind shifted near dawn. Snow blew off the open lanes and settled against the warm cabin walls, softening edges, filling shallow prints. Heat leaking through the siding melted fine details close to the building. Where the driver stopped to clear a vent at the back wall, the sled rested against the cabin. When it moved again, the turn happened farther out, beyond the drift line. Fresh snow fell after, light but steady, erasing the return path in the trees while the packed loop near the cabin stayed visible. The height that felt wrong belonged to the piled load, not a body. The slow pace matched ice and weight. The steady pattern matched a methodical check, not curiosity. Standing there in daylight, with engines idling and staff moving around, the woods gave sound back. Wind stirred branches. A distant bird cut through the air. The silence loosened its grip. Nothing had circled us with intent. Nothing had stopped at the wall and vanished. What remained was the memory of sound without context, the way the mind fills dark gaps with shape and threat. The explanation held. It accounted for every mark. It fit the place and the night and the weather. Even so, when we drove out hours later, past the cabin shrinking in the mirrors, the image stayed of that smooth snow ending at bare wood, as if something heavy had come right up to us and decided not to push further. I slept over because the house felt too big for one person, and my friend had always said he hated the way sound carried when his parents were gone. The place was normal, suburban, the kind of home where everything had a spot and nothing felt staged. I had been there plenty of times before. I knew the hallway by memory. I knew the creak near the stairs. I knew where the light switch was that didn't work unless you pressed it twice. He had a dog, a medium-sized mixed breed with a thick coat and a habit of leaning its full weight into your legs when you sat on the couch. I'd met it more than once. It had slept at my feet during movie nights and left hair on my jeans. That night, the bowls were gone from the kitchen, but I didn't think about it. The floor had been vacuumed recently. There was still a faint smell of dog shampoo in the air, mixed with cleaner. It felt intentional, like someone trying to keep things tidy because no one else was home. We went to bed late. I took the guest room at the end of the hall, the one closest to the backyard. The bed was low and firm, with a thin comforter and a heavier blanket folded at the foot. I didn't unpack. I didn't turn on the fan. The house was quiet in the way it gets after midnight, when the pipes settle and the refrigerator clicks off. I fell asleep on my side, facing the wall. At some point in the night, I shifted and felt weight against the back of my legs. Not pressure all at once, but a slow, familiar contact, like something settling in after circling. It was warm through the blanket. The heat spread across my calves and into the backs of my knees. I remember the exact texture of it. Not fabric, not skin, dense and soft, with a slight resistance when I moved. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't question it. My body recognized the shape before my brain did. I adjusted to make room without thinking, bending my knees a little so the weight fit better. The warmth stayed. There was a steady rise and fall against my legs, slow and rhythmic. Breathing. The kind that sinks with sleep, not sharp or shallow. The smell was faint but there. Clean fur, something like dust and grass, and the soap people use on pets. It wasn't strong enough to wake me fully. It just anchored the sensation, made it complete. My mind filed it as normal and moved on. I slept like that for hours. Once, I half woke when the weight shifted, pressing more firmly into the back of my thighs. The contact changed slightly, as if it had tucked its head in closer. The warmth increased. I remember thinking I should push it away because I didn't want hair on the sheets, then deciding it wasn't worth waking up over. My body relaxed again. When morning came, it came cleanly. No grogginess. No lingering dreams. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin, even lines. The weight was gone. My legs were cool where the blanket had slipped. I sat up and noticed the bed was neat. No hair. No indentation where something heavy had been. The blanket lay smooth over my legs, folded the same way it had been when I fell asleep. The room smelled like detergent and dust, nothing else. The house was quiet. Too quiet for a place that used to have a dog. I walked down the hall and noticed things I hadn't the night before. The leash hook by the door was empty. The dog bed by the couch was gone, the carpet underneath lighter where it had been. There was a stack of flattened cardboard near the trash, the kind you get from a vet's office or a pharmacy. The backyard door was closed, and the glass was clean, no nose marks. In the kitchen, there was a folded paper on the counter with a logo I recognized. A veterinary clinic nearby. The date printed at the top was 2 weeks earlier. My friend looked exhausted in a way that sleep doesn't fix. His face had the slackness of someone who had been holding something in for a while. He moved slowly, deliberately, like every motion had been thought through ahead of time. He told me the dog had been put down 2 weeks earlier. The words landed heavy, even without sound attached to them. He said no one told me because they didn't want it to be weird. They didn't want the house to feel different while I was there. I stood there, holding the edge of the counter, replaying the night in my head with a sudden sharp clarity. The warmth. The breathing. The way I had moved without looking. I didn't argue. I didn't insist. I just listened and watched his hands shake slightly as he poured coffee. Later, when he went back to his room to shower, I walked through the house again, slower this time. I paid attention. The guest room door didn't latch properly. The carpet outside it was worn in a crescent shape, like something paced there often. There were faint scuff marks along the baseboard, not scratches, just dull spots where something brushed past again and again. In the hallway closet, the door was ajar. Inside, behind coats and shoes, was a heavy heating pad folded into thirds. It was the kind meant for physical therapy, with a washable cover the color of old wool. The cord was wrapped neatly around it. Next to it was a weighted vest, the kind used for anxiety, hanging on a plastic hanger. It was dark, the same size and shape as a medium dog when laid flat. In the bathroom trash, beneath tissues and an empty toothpaste box, was a folded printout. A discharge summary from a sleep clinic. My friend's name at the top. The words parasomnia and somnambulism appeared more than once. There were dates highlighted. Notes about nocturnal wandering, positional seeking, pressure-based self-soothing. A recommendation to remove obstacles and to use weighted items to reduce movement during sleep. I thought back to other nights I'd spent there. Times I'd woken to the sound of movement in the hall. The way he'd always joked about being a restless sleeper. The fact that the dog had always been especially attached to him, always sleeping close, always pressed against his legs or back. That night, without the dog, the habits didn't disappear. They just redirected. I imagined him waking in the dark, not fully awake, moving down the hall by memory, opening the wrong door, feeling the bed, seeking the pressure he was used to, curling up where the warmth had always been, breathing slow, unconscious, leaving before morning without awareness or memory. The heating pad explained the warmth. The weighted vest explained the shape and resistance. The smell lingered in the house because grief doesn't air out quickly, and neither does habit. When he came back, dressed and quieter than before, I didn't mention any of it. I didn't need to. The explanation fit too cleanly to ignore. Nothing about the night broke the rules of the world. Nothing required belief beyond the ways people cope when something steady disappears. I left a few hours later. As I walked out, I noticed the hallway light had been turned off, though I hadn't touched it. The house looked normal again. Empty, but intentional. In the car, I realized my legs still remembered the weight. Not fear. Not confusion. Just the echo of something familiar, trying to exist in a space it had occupied for years. The dog wasn't there. But the routine was. Winter pressed against the windows early that year. The cold made everything feel hollow. I slept over because my mom was working a double shift and didn't want me home alone. My friend's family had just moved into a rental house on short notice, and most of their stuff was still in storage. His room was at the back of the house, narrow and square, with bare hardwood floors and a single mattress laid directly on the wood. Boxes were stacked on all sides, tall enough to feel like walls. They smelled like cardboard and dust and old tape. The mattress had no frame. It sagged in the middle from age. There was no sheet, just a blanket folded once and laid flat. The floor around it was coated in a thin layer of gray dust, the kind that settles after a place has been empty. You could see where feet had walked through it earlier that day, faint tracks leading in and out of the room. I didn't think about it then. I just wanted sleep. The house itself felt unsettled, not in a dramatic way, but in the way an unfamiliar place always does at night. The heater clicked on and off. Pipes knocked inside the walls. Air moved through the vents with a dry hiss. The windows were old and rattled when cars passed on the road out front. The room had no curtains yet, only blinds pulled halfway down, letting in a pale wash of streetlight. We lay down fully clothed. I stayed on one side of the mattress, close to the boxes. My friend was already asleep within minutes. I lay there listening to the sounds of the house, the slow rhythm of someone else breathing nearby, and the faint creak of wood as the temperature dropped. The first time the mattress shifted, I thought it was him turning over. The dip happened on the far side, away from me. The mattress sank down as if weight had been placed there, slow and deliberate. The fabric stretched and tightened near my hip. I froze and waited for the movement to settle. It did, then eased back, as if the weight had lifted. I told myself it was nothing. Old foam responds slowly. Floors flex. People move in their sleep. Minutes passed. Maybe more. Time felt stretched and thin. Then it happened again. The mattress lowered on the same side, deeper this time. The motion had direction. It wasn't a roll or a shift. It felt like someone kneeling down, one knee at a time, testing balance. I didn't turn my head. I didn't move my arms. I stared at the edge of a box where the tape had peeled back and curled like a dry leaf. I waited for breathing to change. It didn't. My friend's breath stayed even, shallow, asleep. The mattress held the dip longer this time. My weight slid a fraction toward the center. The wood beneath gave a faint creak, not from the mattress springs, but from the floor itself. Then the pressure eased again. I told myself I was imagining patterns. Fear fills in gaps. The mind invents shape and intent where there is none. I focused on the heater, kicking on in the hallway. I counted the seconds between clicks. I tried to slow my breathing to match the other person in the room. It happened a third time. The dip was closer now, near the middle, as if whoever was doing it had shifted position. The mattress compressed and stayed compressed. I could feel the tension in the fabric through my clothes. I could feel the heat difference, the way a body nearby changes the air. I stayed still because stillness felt safer than movement. Any movement would confirm that I was aware. I didn't know what I was afraid of exactly, only that acknowledging it would make it real in a way I couldn't undo. The pressure moved again, subtle, like a knee lifting and setting down a few inches away. The mattress responded in small waves. The wood beneath gave another soft complaint. I watched the door. It was closed. The handle didn't move. No shadows crossed the blinds. The house sounds continued as before, indifferent. The pressure lifted and returned, lifted and returned. Slow, careful, testing. At some point exhaustion dulled the edge of fear. My muscles ached from holding tension. I must have drifted into a shallow sleep, because the next thing I knew, the room looked different. The streetlight had shifted. The heater was silent. The mattress was level again. I didn't move until morning. When light finally filled the room fully, I sat up and swung my feet to the floor. My soles pressed into the dust, leaving clear prints. The cold bit through my socks. I stood there staring down. Around the mattress, pressed into the dust on the hardwood, were handprints. They were clear enough to see finger lines. Palms flat, fingers spread. Some were larger than others. They weren't placed randomly. They were positioned where someone would brace themselves getting up from the floor, hands pushing down, weight transferred through arms. There were more than two. They formed a rough arc around the mattress, especially on the side where I had felt the dips. Some prints overlapped. Some were partial, fingertips only. One was smudged, as if the hand had slipped. I crouched and looked closer. The dust was undisturbed in the center, under where the mattress had been. The edges showed movement. Knees had left faint marks too, darker ovals where dust had been pressed flat. I followed the prints with my eyes. They led away from the mattress toward the boxes, then toward the door. Near the door, the dust was disturbed in a way that suggested someone had paused there, hands down again, pushing themselves up. I didn't wake my friend. I didn't need to. The explanation settled into place slowly, piece by piece, without words. The house had been empty before they moved in. It had been shown to people, inspected, cleaned only enough to look presentable. The boxes had been stacked against the walls, creating blind spots. The room had no bed frame, no furniture to block space under the window. The back of the house faced an alley lined with garages and fences. The window in that room didn't latch properly yet. Someone had been using the empty house before it was rented. Someone who knew how to stay unseen. Someone who returned after dark, assuming the place was still vacant, moving through familiar rooms, navigating by memory and touch. Someone who hadn't expected a mattress on the floor. The dips hadn't been someone climbing onto the bed. They had been someone realizing too late that they were not alone, kneeling down instinctively to stay low, to listen, to decide what to do next. The careful shifts weren't playful or curious. They were controlled, quiet, calculated. The handprints weren't threatening gestures. They were evidence of balance, of someone keeping their weight off creaking boards, of someone rising slowly from the floor once they were sure we were asleep. Later that day, after we left the room empty again, the window was found open by a few inches. The dust beneath it was disturbed. The prints led that way too. The house was searched properly after that. The locks were changed. The window was fixed. The boxes were moved. Nothing else was found. But I never forgot the feeling of the mattress dipping under deliberate weight, the certainty that comes when fear aligns perfectly with reality, and the knowledge that the person who had been inches away from me that night had made a decision, quietly, to leave instead of stay.